I was framed, humiliated, and erased until the woman I loved returned, with the final piece of evidence. But in the ashes of justice, the real enemy vanished with a flash drive, and she's not done yet. My name is Randy and I am 47 years old, and for 15 of those years I have managed client relations for Bramali Bowworks, a biotech company that once prided itself on integrity, consistency and long-standing relationships. I had built my career there brick by brick, starting with nothing but a passion for solving problems and a deep understanding of people. The science was important, sure, but it was the human connections that made the difference. It was those connections that held everything together until the day Jessica walked in and tore it all apart. She stood at the front of the conference room, freshly polished in a charcoal blazer and matching heels, her tone as cool as the marble floor beneath her. The team sat around the oval table, eyes wide and unmoving as she delivered the blow. Effective immediately, Randy will no longer be with the company, she said. I sat with my hands flat on the surface, fingers barely twitching, my face calm. I nodded and kept my voice steady. I hope the client presentation who goes well on Friday, I said. There was silence, not the respectful kind, the dreadful kind, the kind that clings to your skin like cold fog. They were my team people. I had hired, trained, promoted, watched grow from interns to leaders. Beth, my senior analyst, stared down at her notepad, unwilling or unable to meet my eyes. Jessica tilted her head. What do you mean? She asked. I smiled softly. You will figure it out. I stood and walked toward my office slowly, not rushed, not embarrassed, just steady. Jessica followed but hovered in the doorway like a shadow, hesitating, unsure of what she wanted to say about the Hologate account. She began. Not my problem anymore, I replied, taping up the first cardboard box she left without another word. Packing up 23 years of memories was harder than I thought. Every picture, every trinket, every file folder came with a weight. Memories embedded in each object like echoes. The coffee mug that read "World's Best Dad," a drawing Casey had made when she was in third grade, photos from product launches where I stood smiling with teams that felt more like family, awards from clients I had fought to keep, contracts I had negotiated with midnight calls and early morning flights. One by one, the team filtered in, quiet eyes, unsure hands, lingering handshakes filled with guilt and confusion. Most said little. Beth stayed the longest. This is wrong, she whispered. I gave her a small smile. It's just business. We both knew that was a lie. The drive home was a blur until Helen opened the door with 2 mugs of coffee already waiting on the kitchen table. She took one look at me and said how bad. I sat down and exhaled. Could be worse, but I was lying again, sitting there in the kitchen surrounded by boxers. I felt something sharper than sadness, not anger, not loss, something cleaner and colder, resolve. Jessica had just made the biggest mistake of her career, and she would realize it in less than 48 hours. I had seen it coming for weeks. Jessica had arrived with an MBA from a prestigious school, a portfolio of buzzwords, and a mind full of theories. She had never worked in biotech before, but she was here to modernize operations, streamline workflows, cut costs. She believed in charts, not people, and efficiency over experience. The first signs were subtle: skipped meetings, unscheduled calls, critiques in front of clients, small cuts designed to bleed me out slowly. Last week, I caught her on the phone with Marcus, the new CEO. She said, Randy's methods are outdated. He is well liked, sure, but I can deliver the same results at half the cost. Half the cost meant my team, our years of rapport with clients, our deep understanding of technical nuances that took decades to map. To what Jessica did not understand was that I had prepared. I had documented every slight, every effort she made to erase me. I had copies of client communications and records of internal proposals. I knew what was coming, and I planned for it, because in 15 years of managing multi-million-dollar contracts, you'll learn how to survive storms. The Hologate Systems presentation was not just another meeting. It was a culmination of 8 months of trust building, technical analysis, and strategic alignment. Jessica did not understand any of it. She thought PowerPoint slides and buzzwords would win the day. She did not know that the CTO hated presentations, or that the procurement director responded only to precision and depth, not fluff and flair. That night, Helen watched me tap through folders on my laptop, my fingers pausing on the Hologate files. She said, you are planning something, and I nodded, just thinking. Jessica had called 3 times, left messages filled with feigned urgency and polite desperation. Helen asked, what did she want? The presentation details, I said. And what did you tell her? Nothing. I am not her employee anymore. By midnight, I was writing emails to old contacts who had been trying to hire me for years. By morning, I had 3 interview requests and a formal offer. Driftshade Limited, a firm I had admired for their integrity and growth, reached out personally. Their VP of Business Development, Patricia Holloway, said, we have been watching Bramali and we believe your departure creates a unique opportunity. Friday morning, I walked into Brewster's Coffee House at 9:45, ordered my regular black coffee, and found a table near the window at 10 o'clock on the dot. My phone started buzzing. Jessica again, then again and again. By 10:15, she had called 7 times. I did not answer. At 10:23 Beth called Randy. She whispered, "Where are you? Holligate is here, and Jessica is panicking. She can't find the technical specifications," I said. "They're on the server. Check the Holligate project folder under Systems and Technical Requirements." There was silence then. Beth said, "It is empty. Just contact info." I almost laughed because the specs were never digitized. They were in my blue notebook, the one I had taken home. At 10:45 Marcus called Randy. "I need you to come in. There's been a misunderstanding." I said, "No misunderstanding. You terminated me effective immediately." "I believe those were the words," he stammered. "We can work something out." "Maybe Jessica was hasty," I said. "I cannot legally represent Brim. I am not your employee, so name your rate." "I am not available at 11:30. Holligate walked out after giving Jessica 20 minutes to deliver something she did not understand enough to fake. By noon, she called me again. "This is sabotage," she said. I said, "This is consequences. I could report you for withholding information." I said, "All company files remain on the server. My notebooks were personal property." And she knew that by 1:30. Helen was laughing. Casey just texted that she saw Jessica on LinkedIn posting about exciting new opportunities. She is trying to spin it. Helen said, 3 of your clients already posted asking where you went. In the biotech world. Travel fast. At 3, I had my phone interview with Driftshade, and by 4 I had accepted their offer. They wanted me to start Monday. I poured myself another coffee and looked around the kitchen. Everything Jessica destroyed had been built by people she never tried to understand. She mistook systems for substance, and when that system failed, she had nothing to fall back. Oni had walked away with my dignity and my knowledge intact. The notebook remained on the shelf, a simple blue book filled with scribbles, graphs, and notes. The kind of thing she would never think to look for because people like Jessica believed data lives in folders and clouds, but relationships live in moments, shared conversations. Trust slowly earned and easily broken. The revenge I planned required no sabotage, no lies, no sabotage, just silence and the weight of her own decisions bearing down minute by minute as the clock ticked past opportunity after opportunity with no one left to clean up her mess. Randy stood in the heart of the Driftshade building, feeling the silence like a scream. The corporate machine he had helped build with his heart and hands now pulsed without him, and his legacy had been quietly dismantled, layer by layer. What remained was a monument to betrayal, masked behind mirrored glass and polished smiles. Each morning he walked past the reception as a visitor, not the co-founder he once was. Jessica's influence grew like creeping vines, wrapping around every division, slowly suffocating what was once their shared dream. Her father, James, had faded into the background, enjoying his retirement, while Jessica rewrote the firm's culture, replacing empathy with ruthless efficiency and personal pride with blind loyalty. Helen watched from the sidelines, her eyes always tracing the shadows within Randy's expression. She had returned not just to fight, but to reclaim what her mother had built. Driftshade's beating heart had been Helen's design, a structure meant to foster creativity, not fear. She rejoined under the guise of overseeing the firm's wellness transformation, but her true purpose was deeper, darker, rooted in quiet revenge and untold truths. The documents they had gathered hinted at corruption, buried beneath layers of offshore subsidiaries and shell acquisitions. Beth had unearthed these threads after a chance tip from a former employee of one of Driftshade's now dissolved sister companies. The paper trail led through a maze of legal jargon, encrypted emails, and falsified meeting records. Beth knew how to read between the lines, and what she saw painted a chilling picture. The name Ashgrove Holdings surfaced repeatedly, listed as a silent partner across multiple acquisitions. Yet no physical address, no registered executives, only a digital fingerprint tracing back to a law firm in Zurich, one Beth had encountered before. During a case involving medical supply embezzlement, she pressed Randy to dig deeper, using contacts from his early days in corporate finance, while Helen worked her connections among architectural vendors who had been quietly replaced over the years. Their plan evolved from discovery to strategy. They couldn't take down Jessica with suspicion alone. They needed irrefutable evidence and a stage grand enough to collapse her carefully curated empire. Beth knew such moments required precision and patience, and so they set the trap. A new architectural bid was announced for the international expansion of Driftshade, Jessica's pet project, and a vanity move designed to etch her name into global markets. Helen proposed a rival firm submit a bid. A shell company Randy had quietly formed years ago for philanthropic ventures. Unused until now, they disguised it as an innovative, eco-conscious competitor offering a solution that was both cost-efficient and ethically sourced, something Driftshade could no longer genuinely claim under Jessica's management. Jessica, intrigued and mildly annoyed by the rival bid, invited the new firm for a private pitch. She didn't know that the conference room had been prepped, every mic, every camera calibrated by Helen's contact, a cybersecurity expert with no love for corporate predators. During the presentation, Beth asked pointed questions under her assumed identity, pushing Jessica to explain the inconsistencies in supplier practices. Jessica dodged them with charm and polished lies until Beth revealed the proposal's key insight, a timeline showing Driftshade supplier changes, tied directly to Ashgrove Holdings in a growing pattern of embezzlement, masked as supplier markup. Jessica's facade cracked for a moment, only a flicker, but Helen saw it. Randy saw it. Their recording continued as Jessica offered a private meeting after the pitch, unaware that Beth's hidden device was still active. She spoke with a former CFO, now reduced to a strategic consultant, complaining that the numbers were manageable and that no one would dig too deep, because the founders were sentimental fools chasing ghosts. Beth edited the recording for clarity, added timestamp overlays, and prepared a report cross-referenced with legal precedents and past corporate fraud cases. She shared the file with a trusted investigative journalist who had once tried to expose James years ago before being a story broke within a week. Driftshade stock fluctuated. Board members panicked. Investors demanded clarity, and the whispers turned into demands. Jessica responded by claiming sabotage from disgruntled former employees and launched an internal investigation. Helen and Randy were interviewed separately, and both delivered statements that appeared vague yet innocent, never revealing the full scope of what they knew in parallel. Helen began releasing design prototypes through the shell firm that resonated with clients, human-focused architecture that revived her mother's legacy. The industry media noticed, and soon Driftshade's visionary crown was being challenged, not by competition but by a ghost from within. Amid this chaos, Randy received an anonymous message, a digital packet containing unreleased emails, written by his late wife to James and Helen. It was dated months before her accident, and the words unraveled a reality Randy had never dared imagine. She had discovered the initial Ashgrove transfers and had confronted James, warning him that continued silence would cost more than profits. Helen broke down when Randy confronted her, not out of guilt but because she had been silenced too. Her mother had been planning to expose the corruption through a silent partner publication, but the accident ended more than a life. It buried a truth and it scarred Helen with secrets. She wasn't ready to face the final lines of the message. Read, "Tell Randy the truth before it's too late. Tell him what they're building is no longer ours. It's a weapon." Randy stood in the office that evening alone, watching the lights flicker against the skyline. The city hadn't changed, but he had the architecture of trust, once solid and foundational, now felt like cracked stone beneath his feet. Yet beneath the ruin, hope stirred, not for Driftshade but for something more, for the people, lost for the lives, stolen for love, real and remembered, and for justice. Helen joined him quietly. Their silence said what words could not. Two souls fractured by the same quake, finding alignment in the aftermath, not as co-founders or victims but as architects of a new reckoning. The day of the shareholder meeting dawned gray and uncertain. As if the skies themselves were holding their breath, Randy walked into the building where his name had once commanded loyalty and respect. Now a ghost trailing behind whispered rumors and false narratives. He wore a tailored navy blue suit Helen had once bought for him years ago on a hopeful Christmas, before the cancer, before the boardroom betrayals, before the days when silence answered his every call to Beth. Inside the grand marble-floored conference room, investors and executives murmured to one another, voices laced with expectation and skepticism. Connor stood at the front, his voice booming over the sound system, slick in his presentation, charisma covering every lie in velvet. Jessica was beside him in a crimson blazer, tapping through slides showing manipulated growth charts, smiling numbers that veiled reality. Randy took a seat near the back, unseen but focused, his eyes never leaving the screen or the two people who had ripped everything from him. He remembered what Helen had said before she passed away, that revenge wasn't always about destruction, sometimes it was about revelation. She had left him a USB drive, a key that held the truth, a collection of documents, emails, and voice recordings compiled secretly by Helen over the last 2 years. Her legacy was not only love but justice. As Connor finished his speech, he opened the floor to questions, and Randy stood, every head turned, some with recognition, others with disdain. Randy walked slowly toward the stage, each step echoing louder than the last. He held up the USB, his voice unwavering as he requested to plug in and share an alternative perspective. Connor laughed nervously. Jessica's face twitched, but neither could stop what was unfolding. What followed was a quiet explosion. Projected on screen were spreadsheets showing duplicate invoices, offshore transfers, and ghost employees. Connor's voice in a late-night call boasting about bleeding Driftshade dry before cashing out Jessica's emails, marked confidential, outlining how Randy's removal was to clear the way for a total takeover. Gasps filled the room. One investor stood abruptly, another began recording. The room no longer belonged to Connor. Security was called, but no one moved to stop Randy. Someone at the back began to applaud, a slow ripple that grew as truth settled into the seats like a long-lost shareholder returning home. Connor's face drained. Jessica tried to speak but was drowned by a roar of outrage. The board members voted immediately, freezing Connor's access, terminating Jessica's contracts, and reinstating Randy's shares. His title was not just restored but elevated. They asked him to take over as interim CEO to stabilize the company. Randy accepted, but only until a permanent and honest successor could be found. He had no intention of rebuilding a throne, he just wanted to dismantle the cage. Later that evening, Randy stood in Helen's garden behind her quiet home. The roses she loved still bloomed under a sky smeared with twilight. He held the last letter she had written to him, unopened until now. It spoke of pride, of belief in his integrity. Y&A. Wish for him to move forward, not with bitterness but with wisdom. He looked toward the sky, whispering her name as if the wind could carry his gratitude. He did not feel victorious. He felt human, vulnerable, but finally free in a way that titles and offices had never given him. And as he turned to walk back into the house that had once echoed with Helen's laughter, he knew his story wasn't over, but Jessica's wasn't either. Jessica had vanished in the storm of her downfall. The last anyone saw of her was the back of a silver town car speeding down Langford Avenue as shareholders chanted Randy's name. But disappearance was never disappearance for long. Not in the world of embezzlement and ambition. Not when secrets begged to be uncovered and reputations hung like ornaments on winter-bare trees. Randy returned to his modest home, one he had kept even during his time at Driftshade. Despite offers to relocate to penthouses or sprawling estates, he had always believed that identity must not be wrapped in square footage or skyline views. The house was old, with hardwood floors that creaked in the middle of the night, but it had warmth and a memory in every corner. Beth had not returned any of his messages, and now, after his reappointment, calls poured in from media outlets, congratulatory notes, and old friends crawling from the woodwork as if redemption was a festival and they were late to the parade. But none of them mattered. Not if Beth wasn't standing at his side to see the truth he had restored. Then one evening, a week after the shareholder meeting, a knock echoed at the door. It was soft, hesitant. Randy opened it slowly, half expecting reporters, but instead there she stood, Beth, her face unreadable, her eyes tired, and her breath quickened by emotion. He stepped aside without a word, and she walked in, still silent, until they sat across from one another. I watched the broadcast, she said finally, her voice trembling. You were right all along, and I was too afraid to believe it. Randy didn't rush to speak. He let the silence do what time never could. Weave honesty into the room. Beth reached into her coat and pulled out a flash drive, another one. Randy looked confused until she explained. During the day she spent in silence, she had gone back through her old work files, remembering something strange about expense approvals Jessica had asked her to sign off on. She had found them all, downloaded them, copied, and stored them. Here, not just more evidence, but a final thread in the tapestry of betrayal. Together they sat on the living room floor of the fireplace, crackling quietly behind them as they opened files, read emails, listened to audio clips that painted the full picture. Jessica hadn't just removed Randy, she had been working with outside competitors, trying to sabotage Driftshade's reputation from within. A plan collapse that would tank shares, allowing her partners to buy up the remains at a discount. Next morning, Randy returned to the boardroom, but not as CEO. This time he came only as a witness. They handed everything to the authorities, and soon federal investigators moved in. What began as betrayal now evolved into a full criminal inquiry. Arrests were made, names released, and Jessica's face appeared on the evening news as a fugitive wanted in connection with corporate espionage. But Randy didn't celebrate. He had no taste for victory when it came with cuffs and headlines. Instead, he walked away for good, leaving Driftshade behind for someone new to rebuild, someone untainted by old wars. Weeks passed, the world spun forward, and Randy spent his time writing Helen's story. He sat by her garden every morning with a leather-bound journal, capturing her spirit in ink, her lessons in paragraphs, her strength in chapter titles. He titled it Driftshade Redemption, not for the company but for everyone who had ever been crushed beneath someone else's ambition and dared to rise. Beth stayed by his side, not because they returned to what they had, but because something new had taken root. They didn't call it love, not yet. It was something quieter: trust, patience, a rebuilding of foundations that had once cracked under the weight of confusion. One spring afternoon, as cherry blossoms painted the sky pink and white, Randy and Beth stood together near Helen's grave, planting a rosebush she had once dreamed of growing. Beth whispered something into the wind. Randy smiled, and as they walked away hand in hand, the suspense that had ruled their lives finally faded into peace. But far from there, under a false name in a coastal town, Jessica watched from a cafe window, her hair shorter, her eyes sharper. A small smile played on her lips, not of joy but of planning. She was not finished, not yet. She never lost. She simply retreated to rewrite the rules, and somewhere deep in her coat pocket, another flash drive waited. The story had ended, but the echo of ambition never truly went silent. Moral of the story: true redemption lies not in revenge but in truth, resilience, and integrity. Life lesson: never let betrayal define your worth. Silence may delay justice, but it cannot erase it.